Do you know why sudden emotional distance scares you more than open conflict? What happens when someone you trust becomes unpredictable and your mind still obeys? If you want to stay free from this invisible pull, listen carefully. When emotional bonds turn unstable, your nervous system stops trusting reality and chases memory. The manipulative mind understands this better than you and uses it silently. It knows your brain hates uncertainty more than pain and more than truth. So it gives you small doses of connection, followed by cold silence and confusion. Your mind does not read this as strategy, it reads it as personal failure. You start asking, what did I do wrong, instead of what pattern is controlling me? Cold discipline begins when you stop treating every emotional shift as your responsibility. You look at the pattern like a scientist, not like a desperate pleaser. You study how your mood rises when they respond and collapses when they withdraw. You notice how your sleep, focus, hunger, and self-respect follow their reactions like a slave. This observation is not cruelty. This observation is psychological self-defense and inner order. Dark psychology is not about becoming cruel. It is about seeing clearly. A manipulator survives on your refusal to see the system behind their behavior. They keep you focused on single moments of kindness mixed with scattered moments of neglect. Your mind then builds a hopeful story that hides a very mechanical design. The design is simple reward, confusion, withdrawal, and rare validation repeated until your identity melts. Without cold discipline, you keep calling this tension love, loyalty, or complicated chemistry. With cold discipline, you call it what it is: intermittent reinforcement and control. Machiavelli is often interpreted as saying that if people fear losing you, they obey. The modern manipulator in unstable bonds flips this principle in a quiet way. They train you to fear losing them, so your behavior becomes easy to predict. When you fear losing someone unpredictable, you over-explain, over-apologize, and over-adapt. You become emotionally available while they become emotionally absent, yet still powerful in your mind. This trade is invisible because it happens through repeated tiny emotional negotiations inside your thoughts. Albert Bandura showed how repeated experiences shape belief about what you can handle. If every emotional storm ends with you begging for harmony, your brain learns helplessness. It concludes that your well-being exists only inside their approval and their changing affection. This is how emotional bonds without discipline turn into private laboratories of psychological conditioning. Your reactions are tested, adjusted, reinforced, and punished until you no longer feel like yourself. You say things like, I know this is wrong, but I cannot stop. That sentence is not weakness. That sentence is a sign of deep conditioning. Cold discipline means you rewrite the rule inside your nervous system step by step. The first rule is simple: you will not chase emotional clarity from unstable sources. You will feel the discomfort fully, but you will no longer trade your dignity. When they pull away without reason, you do not run after them for explanation. You let the distance stay while you watch your own panic rise and fall. This is not punishment for them. This is training for your nervous system. You are teaching your body that confusion is survivable and silence is information. The second rule is that you never argue with inconsistent behavior, you measure it. You pay attention to patterns more than promises and more than emotional words. If their affection appears only when you are useful, that pattern is your data. If they become warm only when you try to leave, that pattern is control. Cold discipline means you believe behavior over words, even when your heart protests loudly inside. Your heart will say maybe they are stressed, maybe they are changing, maybe give time. Your discipline answers kindly, maybe, yet until the pattern changes, my boundaries stay firm. The manipulative mind hates calm observers because calm observers break emotional experiments. When you stop reacting instantly, their strategies must become visible or become useless. You start noticing how guilt appears exactly when you move toward independence and distance. You see how sudden affection appears exactly when you mention self-respect or leaving. Once you see this rhythm enough times, you cannot unsee the machinery behind it. This awareness is the birth of cold discipline and the quiet death of illusion. Cold does not mean heartless, it means temperature of judgment, not temperature of empathy. You can feel empathy and still refuse to be psychologically rewired by chaos. You can care about someone and still step back from their unstable patterns. The cold part is your decision quality, not your emotional capacity for kindness. You decide that no bond is allowed to rewrite your sense of worth. You decide that no unpredictable affection is allowed to control your sleep or sanity. This decision is not loud, it is quiet, consistent, and repeated in private. Many people think discipline is about rules, but real discipline is about identity. You are not simply someone who sets boundaries, you are someone who values clarity. When you value clarity, you prefer painful truth over comfortable confusion every single time. This preference slowly kills the power of emotional games played with mixed signals. Manipulators lose their strongest weapon when you stop needing them to define your emotional weather. They can still withdraw or give attention, but your inner climate stays mostly stable. The real danger is this: when bonds stay unpredictable, your mind becomes addicted. Addicted not to the person, but to the emotional roller coaster they create inside you. Your brain starts waiting for the next message, the next gesture, the next mood. Days feel empty without their reaction, even if that reaction is cold or dismissive. This is why you feel panic at silence, because your nervous system expects drama. Cold discipline breaks this addiction by forcing boredom, stability, and self-focus into your routine. Yet if your mind has lived in chaos for years, will it accept peace? Do you know why silence from an unpredictable bond feels heavier than spoken anger? What happens inside you when someone pulls away and your mind still leans forward? If you want to protect your inner stability, you must understand what controls it. When emotional connections lack consistency, your brain enters a state of silent negotiation. You start predicting what will keep the peace instead of what will keep your dignity. You shape your tone, your response speed, and your emotional availability around their moods. You do not notice this shift because it happens through small micro-adjustments each day. Your desire for harmony becomes a vulnerability that a manipulative mind quietly exploits. Dark psychology studies how people respond to uncertain emotional rewards. Uncertainty creates tension, tension creates craving, and craving creates obedience. When someone gives you affection unpredictably, your nervous system becomes hyper-focused. You wait for every sign, every message, every gesture, as if it defines your worth. Your emotional balance becomes tied to external signals, not your internal values. This is the exact moment when cold discipline becomes necessary, not optional. Machiavelli once said, "If you wish to control a mind, control its expectations." The emotionally unstable bond controls you through broken expectations delivered repeatedly. You expect care but receive distance, so you try harder. You expect clarity but receive vagueness, so you explain more. You expect emotional responsibility but receive excuses, so you become forgiving. The pattern continues until you forget what a healthy emotional standard even looks like. Cold discipline begins with ruthless clarity about patterns instead of feelings. Feelings change, patterns stay, patterns reveal the truth you refuse to accept. If someone becomes warm only when you're pulling away, that is not coincidence. If they become distant only when you need support, that is not random behavior. These are psychological indicators of control, using reward withdrawal and emotional debt. Albert Bandura once said, "If your belief collapses, your behavior collapses with it." Manipulative bonds weaken your belief in your own emotional independence. Every time you break a boundary, to keep the peace, you train your brain to submit. Every time you stay silent to avoid conflict, you teach your brain that silence equals safety. This conditioning is subtle but precise, and it reshapes your identity over time. Cold discipline reverses this conditioning with 3 internal principles. The first principle is emotional neutrality during unpredictable shifts. You do not reward inconsistent behavior with more attention or more explanation. You let the shift reveal who they are without interference from your fear. When you respond calmly, you expose the instability instead of fueling it. The second principle is reality-based interpretation, not hope-based interpretation. Hope says maybe they are busy. Reality says they were available for others. Hope says maybe they did not mean to hurt me. Reality says the pattern repeats too often to be accidental. Cold discipline removes hope from data analysis, so your judgment becomes sharp. The third principle is self-referencing instead of other referencing. You ask, what do I want, instead of what will keep them satisfied. This question breaks the loop of emotional dependence created by uncertain rewards. You stop performing for approval and start acting from internal stability. When this shift happens even slightly, the manipulative mind senses the change. Manipulators rely on your emotional speed, not your emotional strength. They expect immediate replies, immediate reassurance, immediate emotional investment. When you slow down your reactions, you interrupt their psychological script. Your calm confuses their pattern because your mind no longer dances to their rhythm. They often respond with sudden affection or sudden irritation to regain influence. Both reactions are tests, not expressions of real connection. Cold discipline teaches you to see tests without emotionally participating in them. You observe instead of absorbing, and this single shift changes everything. You begin to recognize guilt messages as pressure, not concern. You see sudden warmth as manipulation, not healing. You interpret silent withdrawal as strategy, not punishment. This decoding of intent makes emotional chaos lose its emotional grip. Many people fear that discipline will make them cold-hearted or distant. In truth, discipline helps you connect from a place of stability, not desperation. It protects your empathy, so it is used wisely, not drained endlessly. Your emotions remain soft, but your boundaries become firm. Your compassion stays intact, but your self-respect becomes unbreakable. As you develop cold discipline, your inner voice transforms. It stops saying, please do not leave, and starts saying, I choose clarity. It stops saying, what if I lose them, and starts saying, what if I lose myself? This inner voice becomes your shield against emotional unpredictability. You start building a new identity based on standards, not survival instincts. This identity pulls you away from manipulation, even when your emotions resist. But here is the real twist. Most people do not fail because of lack of strength. They fail because they fear the emptiness that discipline creates at first. When you stop over-giving and over-explaining, you feel lonely. When you stop chasing unclear bonds, you feel disconnected. This emptiness is not a wound, it is withdrawal from emotional addiction. Yet the question remains, if your mind craves unpredictability, will it allow stability to replace it? Do you know why your mind trusts emotional intensity more than emotional consistency? What happens when unpredictability feels exciting, but stability feels unfamiliar? If you want to break this hidden pull, you must understand what shapes it. Emotional unpredictability trains your nervous system to expect tension as a normal state. You start believing that unstable affection equals deep connection. Your body reacts strongly to small signals because it is conditioned for emotional alarms. This wiring is not romantic, this wiring is psychological conditioning built over time. Manipulative minds rely on this wiring because predictable reactions create predictable control. Dark psychology reveals that emotional chaos functions like a psychological reward system. When someone gives you attention suddenly, after a cold phase, your brain floods with relief. Relief feels like affection, even when affection was never real. This illusion binds you stronger than genuine care, because the mind remembers contrast. The human brain remembers emotional highs created after lows far longer than steady warmth. This creates a cycle where you chase the person who gives you the most tension, not the most safety. Machiavelli once said, if you understand desire, you understand control. The manipulative mind understands that desire grows stronger when access becomes uncertain. So they offer partial availability and partial distance to keep you emotionally dependent. They respond just enough to reset your hope, but withdraw enough to maintain power. You do not see the pattern because the pattern hides behind your emotional expectations. You believe the connection is unique, but the system is very mechanical. Albert Bandura once said, if you repeat a pattern long enough, it becomes identity. Unstable bonds reshape your identity into someone who fears losing inconsistent people. You start valuing their approval more than your inner peace. You accept vague explanations because your brain prioritizes maintaining connection over clarity. Over time, you stop asking, what do I deserve, and begin asking what keeps them close. This is how emotional unpredictability destroys personal standards without you noticing it. Cold discipline rebuilds your identity from the inside out through psychological recalibration. The first recalibration is sensory detachment from emotional highs. When someone returns with sudden warmth, you do not reward the gesture with full trust. You feel the relief, but you do not let relief make decisions. You acknowledge the emotional spike, but you anchor yourself in past patterns. This reduces the power of inconsistent affection to rewrite your judgment. The second recalibration is redefining what emotional safety feels like. Many people confuse peace with boredom because they were raised on tension. Your nervous system reacts to calm people with suspicion instead of comfort. You feel drawn to unstable personalities because your brain associates intensity with meaning. Cold discipline teaches you to stay present in calmness long enough for it to feel normal. As calm becomes familiar, chaos loses its magnetic pull. The third recalibration is boundary reinforcement during emotional shifts. You stop matching their intensity and start matching your own standards. You do not reply instantly when they suddenly reappear with affection. You do not collapse emotionally when they withdraw without explanation. Your stability becomes independent of their mood changes and emotional waves. This independence breaks the reinforcement loop that kept you psychologically trapped. A manipulative mind depends on your emotional reactivity, not your rational clarity. Your reactivity tells them which buttons work and which words control you. When you stop reacting quickly, they lose access to your emotional blueprint. You become unpredictable to them, and this unpredictability creates psychological distance. They either intensify manipulation or lose interest because your mind no longer feeds the pattern. Cold discipline is not born in moments of strength, it is born in moments of clarity. Clarity shows you how many times you broke your own rules to feel temporarily secure. It shows you how often you accepted confusion instead of truth. It shows you how frequently you abandoned your mind to stabilize theirs. These realizations feel heavy, but they create the foundation for emotional independence. The real transformation appears when you stop arguing with mixed signals. You no longer ask, why did they change, or what did I do wrong? You ask the only question that reveals the truth: does the pattern remain the same? Patterns speak louder than explanations because patterns cannot lie. When you judge actions, not intentions, emotional control weakens instantly. You start operating from observation, not attachment, and this shift is powerful. Many people fear that cold discipline will make them emotionless. In reality, cold discipline protects emotions by filtering where they are invested. It prevents your heart from forming deep bonds with unstable sources. It keeps your empathy safe from people who use it for psychological leverage. Your emotions remain warm, but your decisions become precise. This alignment creates a calm authority inside you that manipulators cannot penetrate. But here is the psychological twist: the cycle of unpredictability does not end easily. Your brain still remembers the emotional highs and seeks them unconsciously. Even after breaking the pattern, you may feel drawn to the same chaos again. This pull is not love, it is neural memory craving familiar tension. Yet the true question remains: will you let memory guide you, or will you let discipline shape you? Do you know why your mind keeps returning to the same unstable patterns even after breaking them? What happens when emotional chaos feels familiar, but emotional stability feels threatening? If you want to reclaim your inner power, you must understand this conflict. Emotional unpredictability creates a psychological template inside you. Your brain begins to expect confusion as a signal of connection. It starts linking uncertainty with meaning and inconsistency with depth. This template does not form by choice, it forms through repeated emotional tension. Every time you adapt to someone's unstable behavior, your mind stores that adaptation as survival. This is why leaving the pattern feels uncomfortable even when the pattern is harmful. Dark psychology explains that unstable bonds trigger a cycle known as the emotional dominance loop. The loop has 3 stages: tension, relief, and reward. First, a sudden shift creates tension. Then a small gesture creates relief. Then your brain interprets the relief as reward, not manipulation. This reward strengthens emotional dependence and weakens your judgment. With enough repetition, you confuse psychological conditioning with emotional intimacy. Machiavelli once said, "If you want loyalty, create conditions where people fear uncertainty." Many manipulative minds use this understanding without knowing its origin. They create emotional uncertainty to maintain mental leverage. They do not need constant control, only selective control. A few cold silences and a few sudden warm gestures maintain influence more effectively than constant negativity. Your mind stays alert for approval and becomes dependent on their emotional temperature. Albert Bandura explained that repeated emotional outcomes shape your belief about your own capabilities. If you repeatedly fail to maintain consistency in the bond, your belief collapses. You begin to assume you are difficult to love or hard to understand. But the truth is simple: you are adapting to chaos, not incompatibility. Chaos rewires your belief system until you trust the bond more than yourself. Once belief is weakened, emotional discipline becomes almost impossible. Cold discipline rebuilds belief by breaking the emotional dominance loop. The first break happens when you refuse to react instantly to emotional shifts. Reaction is the fuel that keeps their influence alive. Silence from you creates a new kind of tension, but this time tension is your ally. It resets the emotional power dynamic and exposes who needs the upper hand. Many unstable personalities become uncomfortable when you no longer absorb their unpredictability. The second break happens when you redefine emotional meaning. You teach yourself that calmness is not emptiness and stability is not dullness. You show your nervous system that attention does not become more valuable when rare. You stop mistaking inconsistency for passion and inconsistency for depth. Your mind learns that genuine connections are consistent, not chaotic, and steady, not dramatic. The third break happens when you no longer internalize the blame for their unpredictability. Manipulative minds depend on your tendency to self-criticize. When they withdraw, you blame yourself. When they return, you credit them. This shift places your emotional stability in their hands. Cold discipline takes that power back by refusing to interpret their behavior through self-blame. Instead, you interpret behavior through psychological accuracy, not emotional insecurity. As you develop this clarity, patterns become impossible to ignore. You see how their attention increases when you distance yourself. You notice how their affection decreases when you speak your truth. You observe how they become polite when you detach and dismissive when you care. These are not random fluctuations. They are indicators of emotional behavior used for control. Once you recognize the pattern, you cannot return to blind emotional involvement. A manipulative mind fears one thing more than confrontation: self-control. They can handle your anger because anger still hooks you. They can handle your hurt because hurt still binds you. But they cannot handle your stability because stability makes you unreadable. Cold discipline creates this unreadable state where your emotions are no longer accessible for influence. Your reactions slow, your triggers fade, and your identity stops bending to inconsistent affection. Many people believe emotional discipline means shutting down. In truth, emotional discipline means choosing where your emotions flow. It means refusing to give your energy to unpredictable sources. It means valuing your mental peace more than temporary emotional highs. Your heart stays kind, but your judgment becomes sharp. Your empathy stays alive, but your boundaries become steel. The transformation becomes visible when you no longer panic during silence. Silence becomes data, not punishment. Distance becomes clarity, not danger. Mixed signals become patterns, not puzzles. Your emotional system stops begging for connection and starts demanding respect. You stop chasing people who destabilize you and begin choosing people who stabilize you. But the deepest conflict emerges here once you gain discipline. The emotional chaos feels weaker. And strangely, your mind panics because the chaos was your comfort zone. You may feel tempted to return to the old pattern just to feel intensity again. Yet that intensity was never love, it was psychological agitation disguised as affection. The question now is simple: when emotional honesty feels unfamiliar, will you trust your new clarity or fall back into emotional addiction masked as connection? Do you know why emotional chaos feels powerful even when it damages your stability? What happens when your mind confuses emotional pressure with emotional depth? If you want to escape this internal trap, you must understand the mechanics behind it. Emotional unpredictability activates the same psychological circuits used in high-stress learning. Your brain pays more attention to inconsistent signals than consistent ones. It treats every cold moment as a threat and every warm moment as survival. This survival wiring creates a hidden hierarchy where their emotions outrank your own. You begin treating their mood as a command and your needs as a distraction. This silent hierarchy shapes how manipulators gain influence without raising their voice. Dark psychology shows that the most effective control is created through emotional contrast. Intense warmth followed by sudden distance increases psychological craving. This contrast feels meaningful because your brain remembers the shift, not the truth. You start valuing emotional relief more than emotional accuracy. You forgive too quickly because relief feels like connection. You ignore patterns because hope feels more comforting than clarity. Machiavelli once said, "If you control how people feel, you control how they think." Unstable emotional bonds use this principle effortlessly. They influence your thoughts by shifting your emotions unpredictably. A warm compliment makes you forget weeks of inconsistency. A moment of silence makes you question your worth. A sudden smile makes you dismiss every red flag you spent months noticing. This is not love, it is emotional conditioning dressed as closeness. Albert Bandura explained that humans learn most from repeated emotional consequences. If you consistently lose peace, when someone becomes distant, your mind adapts. It teaches you that the only way to stay emotionally safe is to please them. Your actions slowly shift from what is right for you to what prevents their withdrawal. This is how emotional dependence forms without you ever agreeing to it. Cold discipline begins when you stop interpreting emotional instability as personal responsibility. The first shift is mental detachment from their emotional weather. You stop adjusting yourself based on their fading or returning attention. You allow their mood to exist without letting it rewrite your behavior. This detachment breaks the chain between their unpredictability and your insecurity. Once that chain weakens, the emotional dominance loop starts collapsing. The second shift is recognizing the difference between emotional truth and emotional reaction. Truth is stable, reaction is temporary. Truth is shown in patterns, reaction is shown in moments. Manipulative minds rely on your focus on moments, so you miss the patterns. Cold discipline forces your mind to prioritize patterns no matter how sweet the moment feels. Once you embrace patterns, your emotional confusion slowly dissolves. The third shift is reclaiming your internal authority. You stop asking what will keep them happy and start asking what keeps you stable. You stop apologizing for their unpredictability and start setting limits around it. You stop accepting emotional pressure as normal and start identifying it as influence. This inner authority is what emotionally unstable personalities fear the most. They lose the ability to pull your attention back with minimal effort. Manipulative control weakens when you become emotionally consistent. Consistency makes their unpredictability ineffective. Consistency removes their advantage. Consistency exposes the gap between who they pretend to be and who they are. When you stay calm during their emotional storms, they lose psychological leverage. When you respond slowly to their emotional shifts, they lose reactive access to your mind. Cold discipline creates a different kind of power, subtle, detached, and unshakable. You begin choosing silence instead of over-explanation. You begin choosing observation instead of emotional surrender. You begin choosing boundaries instead of emotional panic. This power does not destroy your empathy, it protects it. It does not kill your sensitivity, it directs it. You remain warm yet untouchable, compassionate yet unmanipulable. The deeper transformation emerges when you see the truth without emotional distortion. You realize that the bond felt intense not because it was meaningful. It felt intense because your nervous system was constantly in survival mode. The emotional intensity was trauma, not chemistry. The closeness was dependency, not connection. The attachment was conditioning, not compatibility. This realization breaks the illusion, but introduces a new emotional challenge. Once you understand the mechanics, you face a difficult internal reaction. Your mind grieves the fantasy while your logic destroys it. Your heart remembers the emotional highs while your clarity exposes the manipulation. This internal conflict feels like losing something real, even when it was never real. And this pain pushes many people back into old patterns because the truth feels too empty. But emptiness after breaking manipulation is not loss, it is detox. Your nervous system is craving the chaos it once called connection. Your emotions are searching for the intensity that once felt meaningful. Your mind is adjusting to the absence of psychological pressure. This stage decides everything. Yet the question remains, will you allow the craving for emotional chaos to rebuild the chains you finally learned to break? Do you know why the final stage of breaking emotional control feels the most painful? What happens inside you when freedom feels heavier than attachment? If you want to complete this transformation, you must understand the last barrier. Emotional conditioning does not end the moment you walk away from unpredictability. It lingers inside your habits, inside your expectations, and inside your nervous system. Your mind still waits for tension, because tension was the signal for connection. Your emotions still expect inconsistency, because inconsistency was the rhythm you adapted to. This is why freedom feels uncomfortable at first. It lacks the psychological noise you became addicted to. Dark psychology shows that emotional dependence survives on internal echoes, not external contact. Even when the manipulative pattern ends, your mind keeps replaying the loop. It replays old moments of intensity and ignores the long stretches of chaos. It romanticizes instability and forgets the exhaustion it created. This selective memory keeps you emotionally tied long after physical distance exists. Machiavelli once said, "If you break influence, break the memory that supports it." The most difficult manipulation to escape is the one living inside your recollection. Memory protects the illusion long after evidence destroys it. To regain control, you must challenge the memories that paint instability as passion. You remind yourself that every high followed a low, that every warmth followed a withdrawal. You stop treating rare attention as proof of connection and start treating consistency as the real measure. Albert Bandura once said, "If you change belief, you change behavior permanently." The final step of cold discipline is changing your belief about what you deserve. You begin expecting emotional stability as a basic requirement, not a rare privilege. You begin valuing peace over intensity, truth over tension, clarity over emotional drama. Your behavior aligns with these beliefs, and unstable patterns lose access to your identity. Cold discipline becomes complete when your mind no longer chases emotional mystery. Mystery becomes unsettling instead of attractive. Chaos becomes draining instead of exciting. Mixed signals become red flags instead of romantic puzzles. Your nervous system learns that deep connection feels calm, not overwhelming. You begin choosing relationships that do not require self-betrayal to maintain. The final transformation has 3 internal victories. The first victory is emotional neutrality toward old triggers. The same silence that once caused panic now means information. The same distance that once felt like rejection now becomes clarity. The same inconsistency that once confused you now reveals someone's true emotional capacity. Your reactions shift from automatic to deliberate, and influence loses its power. The second victory is the return of self-trust. You stop doubting your intuition just because someone dismissed it. You stop questioning your boundaries just because someone resisted them. You stop shrinking your needs just because someone preferred your silence. Self-trust becomes the anchor that keeps manipulation from ever taking root again. The third victory is the restoration of emotional identity. You reclaim the parts of yourself that were suppressed to keep the bond alive. Your voice returns, your clarity sharpens, your empathy becomes balanced again. You stop performing for approval and start living from alignment. Your identity no longer bends to the conditions set by someone else's instability. The final stage of this journey is psychological closure, not emotional avoidance. Closure happens when you see the entire pattern with unfiltered truth. You realize you were not difficult, you were conditioned. You realize you were not weak, you were emotionally invested. You realize you were not losing a soulmate, you were losing a cycle. This truth frees you from idealizing the very thing that hurt you. Cold discipline does not end in bitterness, it ends in emotional clarity. You become calm, not cold, steady, not desperate, observant, not reactive. Your boundaries no longer depend on someone's affection or withdrawal. Your decisions come from internal authority, not external unpredictability. Your emotional life becomes a stable landscape, not a battlefield. And now the final psychological twist arrives. Freedom gives you exactly what emotional chaos never provided the power to choose again. You are no longer chasing mixed signals, you are no longer waiting for emotional scraps. You are no longer bending to unpredictable moods or rewriting your identity for connection. You stand in a place where your worth is no longer negotiable. But the real question, the one that decides your future, remains unresolved. Now that you finally understand the hidden mechanics of emotional manipulation, now that you have built cold discipline strong enough to break any unpredictable bond, will you choose people who match your new emotional clarity? Or will you allow old habits to pull you back into the cycle you worked so hard to escape?